Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. 888-589-8840 is the number to call. We'll open up topics for this second hour. Glad to have you continue calling in your reaction to my suggestion that Rick Perry just defy or ignore this federal judge who has no constitutional right to tell Texas what its marriage policy ought to be. None. No moral authority, no legal authority, no ethical authority, no constitutional authority, none. Zip, nada. It's not in there. And so I'm urging Governor Perry to simply stand up against this federal tyranny and say no, draw a line in the sand just like they did at the Alamo and say, no, you're not coming in here and telling us how to do our business when you've got no constitutional warrant to do it. What you think about that, give us a call, 888-589-8840. You might want to react to these black pastors saying that Eric Holder ought to be impeached. The American Family Association, we have called for the impeachment of Eric Holder. This was before he went out and told all the attorneys general don't defend marriage. So we join with these black pastors in calling for Eric Holder's impeachment. And the black pastors saying, look, President Obama is one of the most immoral leaders we have ever had in our history as a people, and that he has done more to hurt the American people than any president in my lifetime. You know, your reaction to black clergy saying this. These are people from the black community, African Americans, saying this. Your reaction to that, 888-589-8840. Now, there are some other Republicans out there that are doing a great job, and they are standing for what is right, standing tall, standing strong. One of them is Ted Cruz. Jeff kind of teased a little bit in the audio intro for the second hour. Let's grab clip number 5. This is Chris Matthews, and you can always tell who the most effective conservatives are by the ones that the left tries to demonize, tries to vilify, tries to kneecap, and tries to obliterate. Let's see who Chris Matthews goes after in this soundbite.
American democracy has rested on the people's changing loyalties between two major political parties. They're like two teams taking the turns at bat. For a century and a half, we have chosen either a Democrat or a Republican to be our president. Democrats or Republicans to control each of the two houses of Congress. But what if one of the two parties goes ballistic, heading so far off the spectrum that it's no longer competing for the majority of the voters' loyalty? What if the Republicans get hijacked? If this happens, if the Republican Party becomes a torpedo headed directly for the U.S. Capitol, if it becomes a cruise missile targeted at the government itself, what then? Well, this is the scary ambition of a certain senator from Texas who not only aims to topple the Republican Party leadership, but smirks publicly at the trouble he has created. To Ted Cruz of Texas, government shutdowns and debt ceiling defaults are all in a day's work. They are the business he has chosen. For him, compromise is a curse word. And Republican senators, including Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, spend their days running from fights, as he puts it.
So I'll be curious to know what you think about Chris Matthews' assessment of Ted Cruz. Does that lower Ted Cruz's standing in your estimation, or does it raise it that Chris Matthews is going after him, frightened about this cruise missile? And, you know, you think about this, you know, the left betrays the fact that they're really afraid of Ted Cruz. Now, Chris Matthews obviously trying to marginalize him, no longer competing for the majority of the voters' loyalty. Well, if that's what he's doing, if he's no longer competing for the majority of the voters, then why are you worried about him? Because you're telling us here he's got no chance. Nobody's going to vote for him. Nobody's going to elect him because he's not even competing for the majority of the voters. So why would you even be concerned about it? In fact, you would be cheering him on because you would think it'd be a path of self-destruction. You say, go get him, Ted. You're immolating. You're self-immolating. You're going to burn out. You're going to burn yourself up. You're going to implode. You're on a kamikaze mission. Go for it. They would be encouraging him to pursue the path that he's on, but they're not. They are desperately afraid that Ted Cruz's message might actually resonate with the American people. And speaking of the voice of Ted Cruz, here is clip number 6, Ted Cruz talking about how you win elections. Let's listen.
We got to win elections. You know what? You don't win elections by rolling over. It demoralizes people. You win elections by drawing a line in the sand, by giving people a reason to show up and vote. Look at the last 4 congressional cycles. In 06, 08, and 2012, we followed leadership's strategy of keep your head down, don't rock the boat, don't stand for much of anything, and Republicans got annihilated. The one election that was a good election for us, 2010, we drew a line in the sand. We said we will fight with every ounce of our strength against Obamacare. We're going to stop bankrupting our kids and grandkids. and we won an epic, historic tsunami of an election. That's how we win in 2014. That's how we take the Senate, is taking principled stands with the American people.
So Ted Cruz, I mean, that is a liberal's worst nightmare, what you just heard right there. You don't win elections by rolling over. We tried that in 2006. We tried it in 2008. We tried it in 2012. We got our hats handed to us. We got murdered. We got annihilated. It was Custer at the Little Bighorn when we capitulated, when we rolled over, when we conceded, when we didn't take a principled stand. The only election where we experienced a great victory was 2010. We took a principled stand. Line in the sand, we're going to fight Obamacare with everything we have. So Ted Cruz, that's a good lesson for the Republican Party. This is how you win elections, is not by rolling over, but by drawing a line in the sand and giving people a reason to show up and vote. Let's go back to the phones. Let's start with Bill, Billington, West Virginia. Bill, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hi, Brian.
Hey.
Thank you for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
I just want to make a comment. That gentleman is absolutely right. If Obama is not held accountable for everything he is doing wrong and is allowed to get out of office, what you're looking for, I think the word you were looking for before, is precedent set. Once that's done, you'll never get away from it. I was a shop steward for 30 years in CWA, and I fought agreements. I had it in black and white. I was absolutely right. But someplace in California, they allowed the decision to go against that, and they came back and told me, Bill, precedent set. So it doesn't matter where you live. Once he sets that precedence, you are done.
Yeah, and you're right about that, Bill. You get sort of this momentum that builds. Once a bad thing is done in one place and the word gets out that that's okay, or that maybe he's even legitimized in some way, then the next, I mean, all you got to do now, all you got to do to defeat any piece of legislation is just say that it causes discrimination against gays. Doesn't even have to be true. Doesn't even have to have any substance. Doesn't even have to be close to being accurate. All you got to say, it causes discrimination against gays. Everybody falls over in the aisle and surrenders. All right, Bill, thank you for the call. Let's go to Keith in Houston, Texas. Just to follow up on what Bill was saying, that's exactly what Jonathan Turley was saying. You got to stop this guy. You got to stop Obama before this term is up. Because if the things that he's doing, if they become accepted, then we're finished as a constitutional republic. All right, Keith, what's on your mind?
My thoughts are twofold. First of all, I was always under the impression that the state had more authority over the state than the federal government does. And my second point is, doesn't every governor also have a cell phone and a pen?
That's good. Well, that's a good point that you make. It's a good point that you make, Keith. And Keith is exactly right that the way the founders set up the United States is, do never forget this. This is why we've gotten so far off track from the vision of the founders. That's why we do this program with the Bible in one hand, Constitution in the other. The founders understood that it was the states that were creating the federal government. It was not the federal government that was creating the states. It was the states who were creating the central government. The states are intended by the founders. Were intended by the founders. That's still the design because it's never been changed. The states are intended to be the master, and the federal government is intended, designed by the founders, to be the servant. We've gotten things upside down. Focal Point, AFR Talk.